"Is this piece of junk even street legal?" the young cop sneered at the old man on the rusty motorcycle. She had no idea she was threatening a living legend who commanded armies before she was even born. The sun had not yet breached the horizon, but in the quiet expanse of his farm off Highway 340, James Harris, at 82 years of age, was already wide awake. For him, the day began not with the sun, but with a discipline forged in a world most people only read about in history books. The ritual was unchanging, a testament to a life lived by structure and purpose. 5 a.m., a series of sharp, precise movements on the worn floorboards of his porch, stretches, push-ups, squats, each motion fluid, belying the years etched on his face. He moved with an economy of energy that spoke of decades of training, his breathing steady and controlled in the cool, pre-dawn air. His small farmhouse, weathered but immaculate, smelled of freshly brewed black coffee and old wood. Inside, everything had its place. Tools hung on the walls of his workshop in perfect alignment, a silent army awaiting orders. This morning, his attention was on the 1978 John Deere tractor parked near the barn. It had been sputtering yesterday, a familiar cough in its hydraulic system. James didn't need a manual, he knew its mechanical heartbeat by rote. He could diagnose its ailments by sound alone, a skill honed over 40 years of coaxing life back into tired machinery. He knew exactly which part he needed, a specific valve that he'd have to ride into town to fetch. His transport was another old soldier, a 1970 Harley-Davidson shovelhead. To the casual observer, it was a relic. The chrome was faded in places, the black paint chipped, and the leather on the seat was cracked like dry riverbeds. But James saw something else. He saw a faithful companion. He had rebuilt its engine himself, bolt by bolt, and knew its every vibration, every growl. It wasn't a machine to him, it was a partner in his quiet, solitary life. Its deep, guttural roar was the sound of freedom, a thunderous echo of his own untamed spirit. It started on the first kick, a plume of blue smoke puffing into the air before settling into a steady, powerful rumble. He swung a leg over the saddle with a grace that defied his age. His hands, gnarled with arthritis but steady as a surgeon's, rested on the handlebars. As he rumbled down the long gravel driveway towards the highway, the world seemed to wake around him. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and distant pine, the pastoral symphony of rural life. He was just an old man on an old bike, a fleeting silhouette against the vast, open landscape. Life's cruelest irony, he often thought, was how it cloaked wisdom in the guise of fragility. People saw an old man and assumed weakness, forgetting that the oldest trees have the deepest roots. They saw a rusty motorcycle and assumed it was a hazard, forgetting that what is tested by time and endures is often the most reliable. No one could see the situational awareness that still hummed in his veins, the way his eyes constantly scanned his surroundings, a habit from places where a moment's inattention meant the difference between life and death. To the world, he was an anachronism, a fading photograph from a bygone era. They couldn't know that the battles he had won and the storms he had weathered had forged a strength far greater than muscle and bone. They only saw what was on the surface, and the surface, James knew, was the most deceptive part of all. The ride into town was smooth, the Harley's engine a comforting thrum beneath him. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the asphalt of Highway 340. He pulled up to a red light at the town's main intersection, right beside the gas station he frequented. That's when he saw the flashing red and blue lights bloom in his rearview mirror. A patrol car had pulled in directly behind him. James felt no alarm, only a mild curiosity. He cut the engine, and the world was suddenly quiet, save for the chirping of birds and the distant hum of traffic. The patrol car door opened, and Officer Ava Johnson emerged. She was young, maybe 28, and moved with a forced confidence that often accompanies new authority. Her mirrored sunglasses concealed her eyes, but her posture screamed impatience. She was followed by her partner, Officer David Lopez, who leaned against the patrol car with a grin, ready for the show. "Sir, is that thing even street legal?" Johnson's voice was sharp, cutting through the morning calm. She gestured dismissively at the Harley. Shut off that piece of junk right now. James remained still, his hands resting on the handlebars, his gaze calm and fixed on the horizon ahead. He had already turned the engine off. The question was pure provocation. Johnson and Lopez exchanged an impatient glance. License and registration. And step off the bike. Now, she commanded, her tone hardening. She rested a hand on her holstered weapon, a gesture that was both unnecessary and overtly threatening. Slowly, deliberately, James dismounted. He moved with a precision that felt out of place in the unfolding drama. He reached into his worn leather jacket and produced an equally worn brown wallet, handing over the requested documents. Johnson snatched them and studied the license with open suspicion. 82 years old, she said, loud enough for Lopez to hear. She looked James up and down. Don't you think you're a little too old to be playing biker, Grandpa? Lopez chuckled. Man, this thing's older than my dad. Look at all that rust. It's a public hazard. Hands on the bike, sir. Feet apart, Johnson ordered. The search was a pointless exercise in dominance. They knew it, and James knew it. But they did it anyway, their hands running over the old man's jacket and jeans in a perfunctory, demeaning manner. A small crowd of onlookers began to gather at the gas station and on the sidewalk, their cell phones emerging like digital vultures. Murmurs rippled through the air. Where do you live, sir? Johnson asked, continuing her interrogation. On a farm. Off the highway, James replied, his voice low and even. Alone? Yes. Johnson shot a look at Lopez. It was a look heavy with preconceived notions, a silent communication that read, another confused old man who shouldn't be on his own. Do you have any family? Anyone who takes care of you? She pressed. I've been taking care of myself for 82 years, officer. Yes, but don't you think it's a bit irresponsible to be riding that motorcycle at your age? You could cause an accident. Hurt someone. Her tone was patronizing, as if she were speaking to a child. James remained silent, his hands now clasped behind his back in a stance that was at once relaxed and disciplined. His silence seemed to infuriate her. Sir, I'm talking to you. I'm listening. Then answer me. Don't you think it's irresponsible? Lopez leaned in and whispered to Johnson, just loud enough for James to hear. I think he might be a little deaf, too. Look at him, just standing there. Johnson raised her voice, dripping with condescension. Mr. Harris. Can you hear me? Do you understand what I'm saying? The crowd grew, and so did their voices, a mix of pity and judgment. Poor old man. Don't these cops have anything better to do? To be fair, he does look a bit confused. The world, as it always does, split itself between those who feel and those who judge, especially when a story is incomplete. James closed his eyes for a fleeting second, drawing a slow, deep breath. He'd faced down armed men in dense jungles. He'd endured interrogations in hostile territories. He'd held the hands of dying friends in places God had long forgotten. This public humiliation, this casual cruelty from a child in a uniform, was a different kind of battle, one fought not with weapons, but with dignity. But that was a lifetime ago. Today, he was just an old man on the side of the road. Across the street, Marcus, the owner of the gas station, stopped wiping down a fuel pump. A Gulf War veteran of 58, Marcus had a keen eye for people, especially for fellow servicemen. He recognized James Harris immediately. For 15 years, Harris had been a regular customer, always polite, always punctual with his payments, always with a quiet word of respect. Marcus saw the unfolding scene not just as an arrest, but as a desecration. He saw the officers' sneering condescension, the crowd's gawking, and the unshakable, stoic dignity of the old man. A slow, hot anger began to boil in his blood. This wasn't right. He ducked back into his small office, his heart pounding with a righteous fury. He grabbed the phone and dialed a number he knew by heart, the non-emergency line for the nearby military base, Fort Carson. "Hello, this is Marcus Williams at the gas station on Highway 340, he said, his voice tight. "I need to speak with the officer on duty. It's urgent." He was put on hold for a moment, the tinny music a stark contrast to the tension outside. Finally, a crisp voice answered. "Sergeant Miller, duty officer. How can I help you?" "Sergeant," Marcus began, choosing his words carefully. "I'm a veteran. And I'm watching two local police officers disrespecting another veteran right now, right in front of my station. His name is James Harris. He's 82 years old, an honest man. They're humiliating him in public just for riding his motorcycle." There was a pause on the other end of the line. The duty officer's tone shifted from routine to razor-sharp. "Did you say James Harris?" "Yes. James Harris." "Hold on 1 second, sir." The line went quiet. Marcus watched as Officer Johnson, her patience clearly gone, escalated the situation. "Sir, if you won't cooperate, you're going to have to come with us to the station," she declared. James finally spoke, his voice still unnervingly calm. "And for what charge, officer?" "For inappropriate behavior and failure to properly respond to a law enforcement officer," she improvised, flustered by his composure. She then added the final threat. "Frankly, sir, you need a medical evaluation before you even think about getting on that thing again." It was at that moment that the duty officer came back on the line, his voice now electric with urgency. "Mr. Williams, are you still there? Keep your eyes on the situation. We are dispatching a unit right now. Do not, I repeat, do not let them take him anywhere. Do whatever you have to do to delay them until we arrive." "What's going on? Who is he?" Marcus asked, his own pulse quickening. "Sir, I can't give you details over the phone, but let me ask you this. Did they touch him? They searched him." A string of curses came from the other end of the line. "Just keep him there. We'll be there in less than 15 minutes. Help is on the way for Colonel Harris." The line went dead. "Colonel?" The word hung in the air of the small office. Marcus stared at the old man across the street, who was now calmly refusing to get into the patrol car. Officer Johnson had taken out her handcuffs. The situation was about to reach its breaking point. Marcus had no idea what was coming, but he knew he was about to witness something unforgettable. He stepped out of his office, his phone still in his hand, his eyes locked on the scene, ready to intervene if he had to. "I'm not going," James said, his voice quiet but absolute. The words were not a plea or a negotiation, they were a statement of fact. Officer Johnson, taken aback by his flat refusal, took a step closer. Her face was flushed with anger and frustration. "This isn't a request, it's an order. Now get in the vehicle, or I'll have to use force." "Based on what law, officer?" James asked, his gaze steady. He stood his ground, a granite pillar against a rising tide of uniformed arrogance. Johnson hesitated. She knew she was on shaky legal ground. Detaining an elderly man for a medical evaluation, without clear and present evidence of endangerment, was a gross overreach of her authority. But now, with a crowd filming her every move, backing down would be an admission of poor judgment. Pride, the most dangerous of human flaws, took the wheel. "Elder protection laws," she blurted out, the lie sounding clumsy even to her own ears. "Your behavior indicates you are a risk to yourself and others." For the first time, a small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of James Harris's lips. It was the smile of a man who had heard far more sophisticated lies from far more dangerous enemies. It was the smile of a chess master watching his opponent walk into a trap of their own making. Just as Johnson reached for her handcuffs, a new sound intruded upon the tense standoff. It started as a low, deep rumble, a vibration felt more than heard. It grew rapidly, a percussive roar of powerful engines that made the windows of the nearby storefronts hum. Everyone, the cops, the crowd, even James, turned their heads toward the source. Down the road, a convoy was approaching, and it was approaching fast. At its head were 12 military Humvees, moving in a perfect V formation, kicking up dust from the shoulder of the highway. They moved with a speed and precision that was utterly alien to civilian traffic. The vehicles fanned out, creating a flawless semicircle around the scene, effectively blockading the patrol car and cutting off all escape routes. Their heavy doors opened in unison, and from them emerged 50 soldiers in full combat gear. They moved with a silent, synchronized discipline, forming a 2-deep perimeter, their faces impassive, their eyes fixed forward. The crowd fell into a stunned, breathless silence. From the lead Humvee, an officer emerged. He was tall and lean, around 55, his uniform crisp and adorned with the insignia of a captain. This was Captain George Farrell. He completely ignored the 2 local police officers, his boots crunching on the gravel as he walked with singular purpose directly toward James Harris. He stopped exactly 3 paces away, his back ramrod straight, and snapped the sharpest, most resonant salute Johnson had ever seen. "Colonel Harris," he barked, his voice echoing in the sudden stillness. "Sir. We were informed there was a misunderstanding here." The word "Colonel" detonated in the air like a grenade. Johnson and Lopez exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated panic. Their faces went pale. Captain Farrell finally turned his gaze upon them, and his eyes were like chips of ice. "Who," he asked, his voice low and menacing, "dared to stop Colonel Harris?" Johnson, trying desperately to regain some semblance of control, stammered, "Officer Johnson, local police. We stopped this gentleman because..." "This gentleman?" Farrell's voice rose, and as it did, all 50 soldiers took a single, synchronized step forward, an instinctive, intimidating show of support for their true commander. The sound of their 50 boots hitting the asphalt as one was like a gunshot. Captain Lopez tried to intervene, his earlier bravado gone, replaced by a pleading tone. "We didn't know he was military." Farrell's gaze was withering. This man served 3 tours in Vietnam. He carried out clandestine intelligence operations in the Gulf and Afghanistan. He personally trained hundreds of U.S. Army officers, including myself. This man taught me everything I know about leadership when I was a terrified second lieutenant. This man you stopped for riding a motorcycle holds 2 bronze stars for valor, 2 purple hearts with 4 oak leaf clusters, and the Distinguished Service Cross, our nation's second highest award for bravery. Colonel James Harris is considered a living legend in the United States Armed Forces. He turned his full attention back to Johnson. "Officer, you didn't just disrespect a veteran. You publicly humiliated a decorated war hero who gave 60 years of his life in service to this country. A man whose boots you are not worthy to shine." The shift in the crowd was instantaneous and absolute. The cell phones that had been recording a spectacle of ridicule were now documenting a moment of profound reverence. The whispers changed from "poor old man" to "oh my God," from "he looks confused" to "that officer is finished." The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been annihilated and rebuilt from the ground up. Officer Johnson stood frozen, the full weight of her actions crashing down on her. The mirrored sunglasses no longer made her look intimidating, they made her look like she was hiding in shame. "Sir. Colonel Harris," she began, her voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry. I didn't know." James looked at her, his eyes devoid of anger, filled instead with a weary disappointment. "May I offer you some advice, Officer Johnson?" "Yes, sir," she choked out. "Never judge someone by their appearance," he said, his voice carrying to everyone present. "You have no idea what battles they've fought, or what scars they carry, inside and out." The lesson landed with the force of a physical blow, not just for Johnson, but for every person watching. Captain Farrell approached his former commander. "Colonel, is there anything you need?" An escort? Transportation? No, Captain, James said, a warmth returning to his voice. But thank you for coming. Sir, Farrell replied, his voice thick with emotion. We will always come. Always. With a final nod, James walked back to his Harley. As he kicked the engine to life, the 50 soldiers stood at perfect attention, creating a corridor of honor. He rumbled through their ranks and rode away, the deep roar of his old motorcycle sounding less like a machine and more like a triumphant declaration. An hour later, the phone rang in the office of Sheriff Smith, a 15-year veteran of the local police force. Sheriff Smith speaking. Sheriff, this is Captain Farrell at Fort Carson. We need to have a serious conversation about the incident this morning. Smith sighed. The videos were already all over the internet. Captain, I'm already aware. I've seen the footage. I've spoken with Officers Johnson and Lopez. And what is the procedure going to be, Sheriff? Farrell's voice was calm, but carried the unyielding weight of a military institution. Smith hesitated, caught between loyalty to his officers and the political firestorm that was about to engulf his department. Captain, may I be frank? My officers made a mistake in judgment. A serious one. But it wasn't a crime. Sheriff, let me be clear, Farrell said, his tone sharpening. Colonel Harris is not a vindictive man. He isn't suing anyone. He doesn't want to ruin careers. But we cannot and will not accept our decorated veterans being treated this way in a town that our soldiers protect. This reflects on all of us. Smith understood the unspoken message. This was not a request. The institutional pressure would be immense. What do you suggest, Captain? A new training program. Developed in partnership with us. Your officers will spend time on our base. They will learn from men and women who serve what service, sacrifice, and respect truly mean. It's a non-negotiable part of our continued cooperation. It'll be done, Captain, Smith said, knowing he had no other choice. It'll be done. 1 week later, Sheriff Smith gathered all of his officers for an emergency meeting. The mood was somber. Starting today, he announced, we are implementing a new protocol for all field encounters, especially with our elderly population. And all of you, starting with Officer Johnson and Officer Lopez, will be attending a mandatory sensitivity and respect training program at Fort Carson. A nervous murmur went through the room. Then, Ava Johnson stood up, her face pale but her voice steady. Colleagues, she said, last week, I made a terrible mistake. I disrespected a man who deserves our deepest admiration. I failed. But I learned something more important than procedures or regulations. I learned about human dignity. Every person we stop on the street has a story. Our job is to treat every single one of them with respect. To ask before we assume. And to listen before we judge. Days later, Officer Ava Johnson found herself driving down Highway 340, her heart pounding in her chest. She turned onto a gravel road, her patrol car kicking up a small cloud of dust. The property was simple but impeccably kept, a white-painted wooden house with a welcoming porch, a garden bursting with colorful flowers, and the old John Deere tractor parked next to the barn. And there, in the shade of a large oak tree, rested the 1970 Harley-Davidson. She saw him before he saw her. James Harris was lying on a creeper underneath the tractor, covered in grease, his hands deftly working on the hydraulic system. He was humming a tune she didn't recognize. She pulled her car to a stop, took a deep breath that did little to calm her nerves, and walked over to where he was working. Colonel Harris, she said softly. He slid out from under the tractor, his movements still surprisingly agile. He wiped his greasy hands on an old rag and looked at her, his eyes clear and showing no trace of animosity. Officer Johnson. Can I help you? Sir, I came to talk. If that's all right with you. A gentle smile formed on his lips. Of course. But talk is better with coffee. just made a fresh pot. Inside the modest, clean kitchen, he poured coffee into 2 heavy ceramic mugs. The room was filled with the comforting aroma of coffee and the faint, sweet smell of pipe tobacco. They sat at an old wooden table, sunlight streaming through the window. "Officer," he began, his tone that of a gentle teacher, not an accuser. "May I ask you a few questions?" "Of course, sir." "Why did you become a police officer?" The question caught her off guard. I wanted to help people," she answered honestly. "To make a difference in my community." "A noble reason," he nodded. "Tell me, in your years of service, how many serious accidents caused by elderly drivers have you actually responded to?" She thought for a moment. "Very few, actually. Almost none. Most of the bad ones, they're caused by younger drivers. Drunk, speeding, texting." Harris gave another gentle smile. "Then why, when you saw me, did you immediately assume I was the problem?" Ava couldn't answer. The truth was too obvious and too painful. It was prejudice, plain and simple. An assumption based on his age and the appearance of his motorcycle. She looked down at her hands, ashamed. James stood and walked to the window, looking out at his cows grazing peacefully in the pasture. "The uniform you wear, and the one I used to wear, they grant you authority. But they don't automatically grant you respect. Respect isn't earned by a uniform or a rank. It's earned in here," he said, tapping his chest gently. "It's earned by how you treat people. All people. No matter their age, or how they look, or what they ride." He then shared a short story about a young, cocky lieutenant in Vietnam who made a snap judgment about a quiet, older villager, assuming he was harmless. That judgment, Harris explained, cost 2 good men their lives. First impressions, he concluded, tell you more about the person making them than the person they're looking at. Ava looked out the window at the old motorcycle. She realized James Harris had probably been riding that bike longer than she had been alive. That 1970 Harley-Davidson still made noise, it still looked old and rusty, but it still worked. It still got him where he needed to go. It still had roads to travel. And so did Colonel Harris. So do we all. If you were moved by this story of dignity and respect, show your support for our heroes by clicking the like button and subscribing to the channel. And in the comments below, please type "respect" to honor all the veterans who have served. You never know when you might be standing in the presence of a legend.